Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets get absolutely dumpstered by the Orlando Magic. But guys, we'll always have that win against Memphis. We break down the mess that is the Nets coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Marbeck. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms, and let you know today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. And Doug, no appetizers needed. Let's get into the feast that was the Brooklyn Nets against the Orlando Magic.
Oh, man, the win against the Grizzlies is gone and forgotten, baby. It took less than 24 hours, and that is wiped right off the map. Because
shame on the NBA for putting a back-to-back like this on the Nets schedule. No opportunity to just savor the flavor of that win.
Yeah, look, if finally something good happens, and then you get this. And as we quipped online a little bit ago, it's like, last time I went to Orlando and Disney World, I couldn't wait to leave, and I felt like the Nets might have been in something of the same boat. They really, to say they struggled in this game is a massive understatement. Obviously without Cam Thomas, obviously without Ben Simmons, really. But Orlando on the other side is out without Paolo Banchero, and I'm not sure when the Nets really are in a position where they can afford to make like injury excuses, not like they did. And it was just
they lost by 20 if they were,
another really, really rough performance. And you have to just look squarely at Mikal Bridges here, because he is on, and we're going to spend some time talking about him here, but he's on a really, really rough run over the short term. And it's concerning, because this is the guy that the Nets have, planted their flag with, in terms of either, hesitant maybe to call him a superstar, but at least the guy who will attract other superstars to come in and play. And he's been on the absolute struggle bus here over the short term. And tonight was he was probably his worst game as a Brooklyn Net, right? Would you say that? I mean, he hasn't played worse than this, you wouldn't think.
No, 108-81, by the way, the final score of this absolute blowout loss, just to make sure in case you checked out early on this one, which would blame you for. Yeah, has to be. Has to arguably be the worst game of his Brooklyn Nets career. 29 minutes, 2 of 14 from the field, 0 of 7 from beyond the arc, 4 points over 29 minutes, and a minus 28. He was the worst plus-minus on the Brooklyn Nets roster. And this is one of those things we talk about all the time, when sometimes the box score doesn't tell you the whole story. This box score is atrocious for him, and it doesn't tell you the whole story. Because you and I have repeatedly discussed how if Mikal Bridges and Cam Thomas aren't going to put up 25 plus points a night, this team has no chance to win. Okay, Cam Thomas isn't playing tonight. We get that. But the way in which Mikal Bridges seemed to be exposed as the clear-cut, not capable of not being the number one option, really shouldn't be your number two option. And if he's your number three, you better have 2 really elite scorers ahead of him, because some of this stuff, to me, it could be built up of frustration or otherwise, but the number of sequences throughout this game where Mikal Bridges seemed to willingly walk himself into the length of the Orlando defense with no real agenda, no moves to create space for himself, doesn't have the ability to get at the basket, as we know, with the quickness, with the blow-bys. I'm not condemning Mikal Bridges as a player overall, but it was a recalibration of where he is in the hierarchy of NBA talents. You get exposed in games like this when you play on a bad team, which the Brooklyn Nets obviously are.
Yeah, look, he's 2 for 25 from 3 over his last 3 games, 1 for 11 against Minnesota, 1 for 7 against Memphis, 0 for 7 here against Orlando. If you're going to go into a game and he's going to have tied for the 15th most points in the game in 29 minutes, like he had the 15th most points in the game, which just feels impossible even saying that out loud, but it's true. He tied. There's 3 other players that had 4 points. And in 29 minutes, again, we pretty much know what's going to happen for the Nets. The problem here is that when you have cemented, this guy as, the core piece of your team sort of going forward in the short term, which, look, he's a good player. We're not going to make, deep evaluations probably based on 3 games. but it does make it's much harder to have a steadier hand around that when these are the performances. And you want to say, okay, well, if he had, two guys that, he had a better point guard, for sure. They have major problems in this team. It's not just him. Like, this team has major logistical on-court basketball issues. Like, they have no ball creation. They really have half a point guard, right? Like, they just barely have guys. Honestly, with the tonight's game, they barely have guys who can dribble at an NBA level. Like, it's a bad functioning team. That being said, if you're going to be a top 40, 50 player in the league, which I think the Nets envision him to be, I mean, they probably think he's higher. You just can't have stretches like this. Like, you just can't. The shooting's been bad. Even in the Memphis game, 1 for 7, 4 for 10, and they won kind of in spite of his performance. And if you just go back through the whole month of February, 42% from the field, 33% from three, 18.8 points a game in 35 minutes. It's bad. I mean, this is not just tonight. This has been trending this direction for the better part of the season, and he's had a really, really bad month. There's really no other way to slice it.
And this was, man, I don't know why I'm going to say this number wrong. His consecutive game streak. I'm gonna say 450, and I feel like that. I don't know why. I'm not 100% sure that's the correct number, but to say that on the back end of a season like this, when the team is struggling like this, those things can be cumulative. The wear down of as we talked about before, coming to a team and not thinking this is the way that it was going to look. I'm sure there's a mental side to this as well. But that being the case, when you think about stars around the league, you always think about how even on their quote bad nights, their off nights, they still kind of give you 18, 18 and 7, right? They still give you a stat line that says, he wasn't great, but he gave you enough so others could step up. As you mentioned, this team doesn't have necessarily the others to step up to help Mikal Bridges in those moments, but he doesn't seem to have that level of his game where you can say, hey, no matter what, you count on me for X. And I do wonder what this is going to look like going forward here for this team and for Mikal Bridges specifically. If this is what we're, and we can get into this deeper here, but if this is what it's going to look like night in, night out, this is going to grind here. There's still 25, 26 games remaining on the schedule for this team.
And we've seen them, like, tonight was a really easy scheme, right? Like, it was very easy to scheme. We saw him get blitzed and trapped. He had really no outs. And maybe we can, pause and kind of get into this further. But when they did that, we actually haven't seen that a ton this year, mostly because honestly, teams don't have to. You really don't need to kind of trap him that much, because most times his primary defender is kind of good to go. But it gets a little different when there's no Cam Thomas, because you're like, I think the Magic took a tact of might as well, right? Like, who's going to hurt us, right? Is Dennis Schroeder going to hurt us? Cam Johnson going to hurt us? DFS? Like, we'll take our chances, I suppose. Like, why not just trap them? And it was so effective. I mean, like, actually, disturbingly effective, how easy it was to get the ball out of his hands. They just really had no clue. And we can talk about a little bit more about why that's a problem. Actually, let's get into a little bit more of that here in a second. And we'll talk, why, like, this game maybe highlighted some deeper issues around this team and sort of Bridges as a player. We'll get into that here in a second. First, this episode is brought to you by our friends over at BetterHelp. Sometimes we need the opportunity to just get something off our chest, big or small. Certain things can be really just, they can start to get to you, right? It's important to let it out. You have to get to someone that's unbiased in your own life. Today, you just want to get there, talk about just feeling something right, talking about doing things right. This is where BetterHelp can come into the picture by getting you to talk to a licensed therapist, whether you want to feel authentically upset, sad, excited, whatever it takes to get those things off your chest, to start making sure that the little things don't build up into big things. The therapy can be different for everyone. Most of us have just bigger problems than our favorite sports teams, like we're talking about tonight. And it's important to get those things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible, suited to your schedule. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba. You're going to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. Also want to tell you about our friends over at Stitch Fix. You know that instant confidence boost you get when you put on an outfit that just kind of fits right and makes you look really good. That's why we've been getting into Stitch Fix. With Stitch Fix, you get a stylist who understands your style, your size, and your budget. They do all the shopping for you, which is absolutely music to my ears, because go on to Stitch Fix, went through the quiz, told them everything I liked, everything I didn't like, put in the sizes. They sent the boxes. Bam, good to go. I got the flag and anthem hoodie, which I just took off. I'm not wearing it on the show here because it was been 2.5 straight days of that thing. And the wife said, hey, maybe we want to get out of the Stitch Fix, the hoodie, and get into something else. But that's not a problem because I got another box here on the way, scheduled to come, I think, tomorrow. Because I'm over here looking at Stitch Fix. This is what Stitch Fix does for you. They get you clothes that fit. They get you clothes that make you feel good. And they do all of the work for you. Style that makes you feel as good as you look. Get started today at stitchfix.com/lockedon. That's stitchfix.com/lockedon. stitchfix.com/lockedon.
All right, so as we continue the post-game episode, the Brooklyn Nets, they came out on the losing side of things, 108-81 on the road against Orlando. Yeah, I know, shocking as it may be, Doug. Shocking. I know you've been away from the podcast for an entire episode, and in your absence, the team did win. So you guys connect the dots as you see fit. Nevertheless, over on WeGotNets.com, you can sign up with your email right now and get 5 stories in 5 days, all about the Nets franchise, some of the good old days, some of the lows, some of the highs, and yes, there'll probably be another iteration of this coming at a minimum in the offseason, reflecting back on what has unraveled here for Brooklyn. You can also reach out to us with your questions and comments over there as well. WeGotNets.com. Grab that free ebook today. Now, the one thing I want to bring up here, just to extend the conversation on Mikal Bridges a little bit, because if we were going to, as we did, talk about Cam Thomas and say, hey, one of the things that he needs to learn and get better at is if they're going to run blitzing actions at him, he needs to find the outlet and get the ball out of his hands and give someone else an opportunity to be able to set up a successful offensive look, because you're now playing, hopefully, 4 against 3, at least for a few seconds there, right? Mikal Bridges didn't seem to really know what to do in those moments. Like you said about, you've never needed to send blitzing actions in him. But if we're going to hold a third-year player that's just finally getting a chance to really come into his own to a high standard about development and basketball IQ, that again was just, it was a disappointing thing, not about the result, just the idea that they could blitz him, and Mikal seemed to be easily flustered by that. Listen, you get the ball into someone else's hands and they make the mistake from there, that's fine. But just that initial action seemed to be surprisingly able to throw Mikal off his game early on in this one.
Yeah. Like I said, other teams really haven't had to do this that much this season because most teams are kind of just equipped to be able to handle whatever he's going to bring on ball. Like the Nets don't have a lot of guys like on ball creation. They don't run a lot of set plays, or haven't really, especially with their time involved. It was sort of like a freewheeling, a little bit of like a your turn, my turn thing with him and Cam Thomas to some degree. Things look a little different with Simmons, though not necessarily all the time better in the half court. But for the most part, teams haven't really needed to get on board with like this style of defense for him, because you usually save that for the guys who you really need to control, right? Like Trae Young gets it every once in a while. Luka, obviously, guys who are like point of attack, trying to, you really got to limit it. They don't really need to do that with Bridges. The problem is when you take a look around the rest of the roster tonight, no Cam Thomas, right? No, Dennis Schroeder, like, okay, no, I don't think no one's really too worried about him. And literally the other 3 guys, I mean, Cam Johnson will take it to the hole once in a blue moon if he can get past the guy, but that's not really going to happen.
Yeah.
And so after that, it's like, yeah, you might as well. You got Jalen Suggs out there. Like, you can bring a little help. You can have someone dig, and it's actually just pretty easy. They looked completely unprepared for it. And to some degree, I'm not surprised that we're unprepared for it. It really just hasn't happened that much. Now, that being said, it also looked even worse than we're describing, like in the moment, because it just looked so bad across the board. And one of the most disturbing numbers here too on the game, and this is a part of it, not the whole thing, on the game, Nets had 20 turnovers, 18 assists, more turnovers than assists in this game.
Yeah.
Like, these numbers are just so disturbing. And part of it stems from their just lack of, ability to like just get anything going on offense. And tonight that started with Bridges, stopped with Bridges.
Yeah. And listen, not because it's not just solely about him. This is a full team thing. And you mentioned it there, not being prepared for it because they haven't seen it before. That's okay. There needs to be a world where, whether it was Jacques Vaughn, whether it's now Kevin Ollie, it's not about who's getting blitzed. It's that, hey, if a blitzing action happens from the defense, this is the out, right? And you can pretty much identify it's going to be Cam Thomas. It's going to happen to. Hey, the second guy they'll probably do it to will be Mikal Bridges. Right after that, they're probably not going to do it. So everybody else should have a clear directive about how do we break this, right? How do we bring somebody to the ball, help break that up? What is Mikal's action off of that to maybe get him going towards the basket? Some of these things are fairly fundamental, and whether or not it's just calling a timeout and going over that with everybody or not, it always seems like the Nets are a step behind on those type of adjustments to in-game things that are happening to them. The other thing that I'd look at here too, you talk about just starting lineup. This is, again, this isn't an indictment on Dorian Finney-Smith. 21 minutes, 3 points, only took 2 shots, had 4 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, a block. Like, there's some things in the stat line that you can like, but this is, again, a reminder about the lack of function of this roster. Because you said it. Well, if they take Mikal Bridges out of the game, who are you going to look to next? Well, you're not throwing it to Dorian Finney-Smith and saying, hey, can you break somebody down off the dribble and get the hole here? It's not going to happen. He doesn't create his own space, even on the perimeter, to get his shot off. That's, again, not a critique of who he is. It's the reality of what his game is. So all of a sudden, these things start to fall apart in a really big way. And it circles you back to the other guy that you mentioned there, Cam Johnson, which I think is like, if there was ever a game when you'd say, hey, Cam, here's an opportunity for you to elevate yourself and help take some of that load off of Mikal Bridges. We don't have Cam Thomas in this game. 4 of 10, 29 minutes, 9 points. You mentioned it. I thought that we would see him this season start to get more of that downhill attacking at the basket, using a little bit more of his size. It doesn't exist. And he's not fast enough, and he can't get past people. He doesn't have that quick first step. So it's just an exposure of all the limitations of these players that are supposed to be playing as the 5th, 4th, and 3rd best players on a roster, and they're playing as the 1st and 2nd best players.
We'll talk about Shawn Marks later, because like there's a conversation to be had.
A whole other discussion I'd like to get
about
into.
Marks, but I'll begin that conversation to some degree by talking about Cam Johnson here. Because like obviously Bridges had the overall season. It's come and gone. Like Bridges at least has had some sort of like peaky games here for sure, right? Like we're not
he's lulled,
this many
but
games.
you can still like overall what he is as a player.
Yeah. The Cam Johnson thing this year has been, I mean, if you redid the contract this year, right? I was thinking about this the other day. If he was a free agent this year, right? Like going into this season, the contract, I mean, wouldn't look anywhere close to what he got, right?
I crunched
Like,
the numbers on this. He can't earn any more than Lonnie Walker does right now. And that's a little
right.
note.
It's like, I mean, I could be more than that, but like, I know you're kidding, but it does beg the question of like how bad this contract is right now, because, it's not crazy money, but like 26 million this year, 23.6 next year, 21.5, 23.6, I mean, what's this going to look like in 4 years? This year, it's been, the 3-point shooting has been on par with where he's been, right? Like he's shooting 39% from 3. Great. When he came over to the Nets last year, he was getting to the line 3.5 times, which showed that he was like sort of just being a little more aggressive with the ball. That's down to 1.7. So that's been halved, right? In terms of just overall free throw attempts. His shots are down to 11, fewer than 11 shots per game this year. Now the minutes are down a little bit because he just doesn't play a lot of minutes. Like, because there's also been some injury stuff in here that's limited his minutes, and he just hasn't been able to play a lot. 13.4 points per game. It's been bad. Okay, let me say bad relative to the contract. I always want to caveat these things, right? Like overall, has he been a bad basketball player? No, he's not been a bad basketball player. Is he bad for 25 million? Oh yeah. Right? Like this is how, but you have to always factor this way. Like you have to factor in how much you cost against the cap to how much are able to produce on the court. And he is not coming anywhere close to the contract right now. And so
missing Joe Harris a little bit, missing a little Joey buckets at the moment.
I mean, it's got a little bit of those vibes. Like it's got like a little bit of the vibes of just like stand still, catch and shoot 3. And if anything else needs to happen, forget it. Like that's kind of where he is.
Coming up here in a second, I will reiterate that comparison and how strikingly similar it actually is relative to what we thought it would be and the problems that can come off of that. Plus, when's the next game that the Brooklyn Nets are going to win? We'll take a look at the schedule coming up next.
All right. Talk about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. Over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash with all the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit. Only available to U.S. customers.
All right, so as we tie a bow on the post-game podcast, the Brooklyn Nets falling 108-81, getting absolutely dumpstered by the Orlando Magic, taking all the joy off the table. Listen, when I was in here for the post-game last night after the Grizzlies, plenty of people were saying, it's the Grizzlies. They don't have any of their players. They're giving out 10-day contracts. I knew that. I mentioned it several times throughout the show. And guess what? I wasn't going to give back any of my joy of taking some of the positives, some of the nice things we saw. By the way, Cam Johnson, I thought, had a nice overall game, one night earlier. Yeah, you got to savor those because we'll talk about the schedule coming up here. And actually, we'll ask a pretty bold question. I should have led to the break with this. Are the Brooklyn Nets the worst team in basketball? We'll get to that in just a moment here. But on the Cam Johnson thing, two pieces, because you mentioned about the injuries. Going back to 2019-20 when he came into the league, 57 games played, 60 the following year, 66 the year after. Combined, coming over to Brooklyn, he played 42 games. That was coming off the injury that cut his season short in 21-22. He's played 44 games so far to this point. He's not a guy that you consider to be injury prone in the Ben Simmons category, going to miss really big chunks of time. But he is a guy that has a lot of little injuries, and they add up to little missed chunks of time. It adds up to having to ramp up, getting yourself back into action. And this season has been, I think, a prime example of that. Starts the season, it doesn't end up playing full strength, goes down again with a little injury, and both times his recovery and getting back onto the court seems to take a lot longer to ramp up his minutes. So when we make that comparison to Joe Harris, expectations versus results, listen, whatever Joe Harris ended up not being by the end of his tenure with the Brooklyn Nets, there was never a question that you were getting 100% of whatever Joe Harris had. Sometimes it didn't look good. Sometimes it didn't work out. But Joe Harris is like the guy that has stayed in the league because he gives you max effort every single second on the court. And I'm not about questioning effort kind of guys. But from a natural talent standpoint, you would think that Cameron Johnson should be a much better player than what you get night in, night out from him. Does that seem fair to say based on like what his profile is, what his defensive and offensive value is supposed to be for this team? He's supposed to have like a couple extra elements to his game relative to a Joe Harris. And in the end, he's actually a lot more similar. Like you said, I'll knock down some threes, and that's kind of all I'm offering you.
Yeah, I mean, I won't even. For me, the evaluation is easy because I don't even need to question the other stuff, which I don't blame you for doing necessarily, but I just don't even need to. Just compare it to the contract. Is he a 25? That's all you have to do. Is he a $25 million a year player? I mean, obviously not, right? Obviously not. So it's like not really. It's not even a conversation. Is he's well underperformed the contract. Again, there's probably some other context in here, and that's kind of like the little asterisk you have to put against this whole entire Nets team is that like, oh, this isn't the final product and blah, blah, blah. And the coach and, they don't have a point guard. Okay. Well, it's still the team and it's still the player. And so we're still allowed to like overperform things even with given different context. And so that's really, to me, all you need to look at. Is the contract a good signing or a bad signing? It's a bad signing. Like that's it. Like based on what he's done, the stats, the shooting, the overall game, what he brings to the table, it's an overpay. It's not like a massive overpay. They didn't overpay by double or something like that. Like,
right.
Like the Simmons contract is an overpay, like an order of magnitude many times more, right? This is not that. If you put him back on the open market, he would get less, but not a league minimum or something like that, right? So it's not that situation, but it's clearly like if he hit the open market today as a free agent, which is basically 1 year removed from when he, year plus that when he did from last, the contract will be so much less. And these are always the concerns when you sign sort of like getting up there in years kind of guys to these second contracts when they kind of deserve to get paid, right? Because like it's, they're up for a contract and they deserve to get paid. These are the very tricky spots you can get yourself into. It's these second contracts that you're 27. And I know, and people have pushed back against like, 27 is your peak. You don't enter a steep decline when you're 27, but you usually don't get like many factors better, right? So I'll put it that way, right? Like, I don't think people don't.
You refine some things about your game, but you don't find a new level to your game.
Usually not. Usually not. When you hit this age, you kind of are what you are. You can probably get, and I think that's like the misdiagnosis we sort of made going into the season, probably just drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit
100%.
and trusting that the contract was going to be correct. And it just wasn't. Like, it was just an overpay. And it has a potential to look really pretty rough. I mean, in like 2 years, but hopefully maybe like he gets healthier and is able to just expand things a little bit more. But this season has just been a pretty big disappointment.
By the way, I mean, obviously the Brooklyn Nets lost. There wasn't a ton to take away on the back end of this game. You got earlier minutes from Jalen Wilson and Trendon Watford for what that's worth, if you're into that sort of thing. But since this ended up being a discussion around Cameron Johnson, specifically because of his performance in this game and overall in the season, makes $25.6 million this year, as you mentioned. Let me just rattle off these handful of names that are all sub. The highest one here, we'll start with, is DeMar Rosen at 28.6. DeMar Rosen, Julius Randle, Jeremy Grant, Jordan Poole, Jaren Jackson Jr., Tyler Hero, Jalen Brunson making $26.3 million, Kyle Kuzma, John Collins, Brooke Lopez, Mike Connolly, Andrew Wiggins, Anthony Simons, RJ Barrett, Jordan Clarkson, Terry Rozier, Dylan Brooks, Malcolm Brogdon, Draymond Green, Aaron Gordon, Bruce Brown. Those are all guys that make somewhere between $22 and $28 million currently on this NBA season. How many of them are you not taking ahead of Cameron Johnson in terms of skill set and also expectation, right, of results, what we're going to get for what we're paying you? Almost every one of those guys, I think you'd say, for what they are, for what their role is, offers you more stability, more consistency, right? More predictable results on a game in, game out basis. So that's also,
yeah, like for a single season, I think that don't read it again, but like for a, I mean, there's some that are clear, right? Like Brunson, whatever. Like there's some that are just like, they're just great contracts. And then there's some you're like, okay, well, maybe in 2 years, they might not be like Conley, right? It's like, okay, he's really old. So there's definitely context around it. But yeah, if you just read that list again, he would be near the bottom of it. And it's just a bad spot to be in as an organizational rebuild. Like once you're really not afforded too many contract like mistakes. And they clearly have they literally have the worst one ever on the books now with Simmons, and they're coming up to this one with Claxton, which is going to be a really interesting question about like, do you get yourself in a similar spot? There's no other comps. I mean, he's a lot younger. He's a different profile. It's the thing's different here, but
just spending money.
But these are the tricky spots. Like these are the tricky spots for your team. It's a little better when you're on a championship path and you can overpay and you're like, hey, we got to like that was like the Joe Harris thing. It's like, hey, let's overplay for the role player a little bit because we kind of need this exact guy and it's going to help us, right? But if you're not there, these contracts look really like they really inhibit your ability to kind of do stuff going forward.
And maybe a player like him, like with many players, has value to another team, and they look at the contract the way it should be through a prism if you're of a team of a certain level. Remind everybody, while I just go over the schedule here before we get out the door, upcoming for the Nets, the point differential over the last handful of games for them, including
well, I did it during I ran it during the game, and they it's something like they're minus like 101 or something like that over the last 6 games. It's closer to 101 than it is to 0. So let's call it. It was 104, and I think they lost. I think it's like 106, something like that. It's really close. It's they've lost by their last 6 games. They've been outscored by 106 points, and that includes the Memphis win. This has been.
And the reason why I wanted you to come at least close to nailing that number is because for whatever we're discussing about where these players are and what the talent level is of this roster, these results are not commiserate with the talent on this team. They are not a good team, but they are getting dumped by everyone other so far in recent games. A team that has 10-day contracts and is pulling guys in off the street right now because of the injuries that they're dealing with. That's the level of dysfunction I think that's going on right now after the Jock Vaughn firing and whatever the rest of the season is going to look like, which will lead to our next episode. So be sure to be here for this one about Shawn Marks and where he currently stands inside of this franchise.
All right, we're going to get out of here. We're going to stick around here. We're going to talk a little Shawn Marks. If you're on the YouTube feed, you're going to hear some Shawn Marks talk here in a second. If you're on the podcast feed, it's going to come a day later. Make sure you go grab that free ebook over at wegotnets.com.
You know, you got a very valid point, but on the other hand, shut up. That's the critic, Johnny Lovitz.
One of the all-time great posts. We're back tomorrow and in a moment on YouTube talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball. Yeah. Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets continue a somewhat disappointing back end of their season following the lack of trades and the reports that Houston wanted to give it all back to Brooklyn for Mikal Bridges. Where do we stand on Shawn Marks right now? And why hasn't he possibly already been fired? We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Arbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms and let you know that you can make a bigger impact at work with Grammarly. Sign up and download for free at Grammarly.com/podcasts. And Doug, maybe I'm a little juiced up coming off of that game against the Orlando Magic, but we did feel like it's about as apt a time to have a discussion about Shawn Marks, the decisions not made at this latest deadline, and what it looks like for him going forward into this offseason.
Yeah, this is going to be a really interesting final run to the season here because short of the Grizzlies game that got everyone's hope, I don't think anyone was like over their skis too far about like what that game meant, right? It was the Grizzlies.
Nice to get a win.
We kind of tongue in cheek talked about it like it was a huge win, but it was mostly scrubs. But those guys fight really hard too every single night. So it's like I think from that standpoint. But regardless, this run has been bad for a while. They fired Jacques Vaughn. That made literally no change, right? If it's been as bad, if not worse, in the short term. The team has been mostly healthy in this stretch, right? Like they've had most of their guys. And at some point, there's just no more excuses for the general manager to like still be the person guiding the ship. And if you factor in that there might have been chances here to trade Mikal Bridges for, let's not even call it all the Houston stuff. Let's call it some, right? Because there's some disagreement around what was offered. Okay. So I'll just say there's some disagreement on what was offered. But if that wasn't even considered, I think there's a very good chance that Shawn Marks like has completely overplayed his hand here. And it's getting harder and harder to make a case about why he should continue guiding the ship short of some massive moves this summer. And I personally struggle to see like the mechanisms by which they can all happen. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't help that you have a team that sure doesn't look that attractive to want to come to when you get killed every single night in the basketball court.
Yep. You and I talked about this when everyone was saying about Mitchell at this trade deadline, Donovan Mitchell from the Cavs, right? Or in this summer now, and always resetting the timeline of when they'll go get this superstar. Guess what? You play another 26 games like they're playing right now. Why are superstars coming there for that, right? Why are players making that choice? And you can say, well, because superstars have that ego about them in a good way, and they're going to bring other superstars, and it's all going to turn around. Maybe you're right. But I'll make the comparison when we were talking about Cameron Johnson, Mikal Bridges in our post-game episode. I'll make the comparison to the crosstown team in the New York Knicks. When you think about a player like Julius Randle, we talked about him at the time. He went and signed with the Knicks just ahead of, it was same offseason that Kyrie and Kevin Durant came here. And you thought, he's not a number one guy. He's not even number two guy. But he's a consistent player that gives you the same type of output night over night, and he's there. And then, okay, you draft RJ Barrett. You see how that works out. You go get Jalen Brunson. You see it, right? The steady buildup. But the pieces that were in place there were showing you their individual value. Right now, this team, these individual players are not showing their individual value. So collectively, you have maybe right now could be vying for the worst team in the league by the time it's all said and done. From a functionality standpoint, right? From an attractiveness standpoint, it's brutal. And I can't believe how quickly we've gotten to this place inside of this single season.
They're the worst team in the league net rating wise since the All-Star break. And again, that factors in the Grizzlies trade. Geez, I got trades in my mind. The Grizzlies game. And it's just like it's so hard to see it. And here's the thing too. And this is where Shawn Marks has to be at least a little worried. Let's say the Rockets going into this trade deadline had been interested. It's like maybe it's like Jalen Green's name has been thrown out there. So maybe it was like not all the picks, but it was like Jalen Green and then some picks and swaps back, something like that, right? Okay.
Mhm.
I can see why it's like a close call. But here's the thing. Now, if you're the Rockets, the price has gone down for Bridges probably. And the price on the picks has gone up because the Nets look so bad. Like the value graph is headed in totally the wrong direction on both sides because it's like, well, Bridges hasn't looked totally amazing here. Okay, whatever. Maybe teams still value that differently if he's a role player, more of like a 3 or a 4, right? Okay. But now the Nets look so bad that the Rockets have to be like, right now the Nets are projected to give over the 7th or 8th pick, depending on how you sim the lottery. It's like 7th or 8th pick, something like that. Okay, even in a weak draft, it's still the 7th or 8th pick in the draft. Like I know everyone's, it's a weak draft. Okay,
yeah, I couldn't care less about that. You know, there's still players. I mean,
of course. And then next year, they're going to get the better of the swap. And you could probably tell yourself a really good story. It's like, well, how much better is this going to look next year? Still going to have Ben Simmons on the books. They're still going to have Bridges and Thomas. They can't, like, they're stuck. We talked about Cam Johnson's contract last episode. They're stuck with that. We'll see what happens with Claxton. Still don't have a point guard. Without a ton of ways to go get it. So unless they unload all their draft capital, i.e. the Nets, that pick might look great. And so the value thing, I just don't even think the offers will be there in the same way. And I just think that like the job is so tenuous. And when you're GMing for your job, which might be the case here, honestly, there's no worse spot to be in franchise wise. There's no worse. You literally can't. It usually ends in something like malpractice. We're not there yet, but by some of this reporting, it seems like we're close.
And that's why coming up here in a second, we're going to get into what happens when a GM is desperate to save his job, to save the trajectory of what he has constructed. You start to go out and potentially overpay on the market. We'll discuss how damaging that could be for this team coming up here in a second. But first, we got to let you know that over there at eBay Motors, why they've teamed up with our good friend, Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd, to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each and every week all season long. Doesn't matter if you're prepping for the daily draft or you're scouting the waiver wire. Every week, we're going to go ahead and provide you with players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So, Dougster, who does Josh have lined up this week in eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week?
Yes, definitely good ones. I had the Sumo. We talked about him last time. He's been in the starting lineup for the Bulls. He's running out there like close to 40 minutes. No Patrick Williams, and they've been running really, really tight rotations. Every once in a while, you get a Drummond start over there, but for the most part, it's been Ayo getting close to 40 minutes. You got to like him as an ad for your team if he's still out there. Keontae George still in the starting lineup for the Jazz, along with Taylor Hendricks, and those guys are being able to get enough minutes in that rotation to really kind of boost their fantasy value. So both Keontae George and Taylor Hendricks are out there. If they're still out there in your leagues, make sure you're getting them because those are the guys that it looks like they're probably pretty entrenched in those roles going forward. Kelly Olynyk is going to probably take a pretty big bump up here. If Jakob Poeltl is out, he could enter the starting lineup as the starting center, possibly there in Toronto. So just a couple of guys, just a few of the guys. Sorry, a couple's just two. I gave you more than that. Just a few of the guys to take a look at here coming from our friend Josh Lloyd. Josh Lloyd's there to help you with your fantasy championship. eBay Motors knows the championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack bumpers, whatever your baby needs. eBay Motors has it with eBay Guaranteed Fit. It's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, the price is your burden rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
All right, so as we continue our episode, we mentioned there at the top, what situation is Shawn Marks in right now? He makes it through the trade deadline. He makes it through the firing of another head coach. But specifically when we think back again to that Houston offer here, if you make that decision at the trade deadline and you move Bridges, you're communicating, if you're Shawn Marks, hey, this is the rebuild. This is the best way to get value. This is how we start to control our own destiny again. To not do that, you're now saying, he's a part of what we want to move forward with. And so is Cam Johnson. And before we even get into the Claxton piece this offseason, which I think is important too, now you start to say, so we didn't get our picks back, and we may have to go spend all of our Phoenix picks, all of our Dallas picks, all that we got from Philadelphia to go get two legitimate players to bring in here. And on top of which, going into next season, you have to make the decision about what's happening with Ben Simmons and his contract right now.
Well, I mean,
understand that it's going to be on the books, and all you can do is wait for it to
oh
be
yeah,
gone.
gotcha, yeah.
But it meaning it occupies money, right?
Yes.
So you have 20 plus on Mikal, you got 20 plus on Cameron Johnson. You have to decide about spending maybe 20 plus ish on Nicholas Claxton. You got 40 million tied into Ben Simmons for another year, and then you're going to have to, if you want this team to be competitive, if you want to sell that you did it, you succeeded, you're going to have to go spend for 2 more players that are going to make 30 plus million, 40 plus million dollars, and money that you want to be paying players like that. So now you're in the luxury tax, right? Now you're right back into that situation that it seemed like the organization wanted to get away from. And you kind of can't right now, I would say, afford to wait the 1 more year until Ben Simmons comes off the books. You kind of got to do it now, because this thing looks like it could be dumpster fire territory by the end of the year. And the only way to cycle back is to go, yeah, but wait. We went and got 2 stars. It's all good. We've recalibrated. This is what we're going to look like going forward. We're going to be highly competitive.
I've always really struggled to see the path by which they do this, right? It's a long talking point. It's like, hey, look, Mikal Bridges, we're going to go for the superstar. He's a great guy. I'm not saying this tongue in cheek. Like, this is true. Like, he's a great guy. A lot of players want to play with him. Mm-hmm. I've always gotten that. It's always been harder for me to just see the functional way to make it happen. Like, because of all the things you just mentioned, right? The Simmons contract, which is just a negative asset, which means you'll have to attach stuff to basically get off of it, right? Like, you're not just coming free and clear. Maybe it's a good money matching thing, but it's not a good value back, except matching, that what's that?
It's not a good asset match in terms of what.
No, it's not an asset. I mean, assets, retain value. This is
take the first 3 letters in that word and then move on.
And so you have that piece of it. You have, a possible Cam Thomas extension coming down the road here. So, like, I don't know where the organization views him either, but you just have all these like sort of functional problems. So it was always kind of like a double problem bottom line for me to envision how this was going to happen. Now you couple in that it might not be that attractive a place, right? Because there aren't that many like sort of like winning players here, right? And so I don't know, maybe the league views that differently and they view, geography more than thing, but that's really hasn't been that actually, that doesn't even check too, because we've seen multiple situations like, KD not taking meetings with the Knicks and like these guys that don't want to do this other stuff when they think the organization is a problem. And I just don't see how you look from the outside at this Nets team right now and think that like there's anything to grab hold of. It just, it seems so tenuous, and tenuous feels like a superlative more than anything else.
Kevin Durant said he didn't want to go to the Knicks because they weren't cool. Like, and that was overlooking the fact that wherever he goes, the place becomes cool. He's like, it wasn't cool. Like, and then now they've built up and they look good and whatever. So to your point, there's definitely cachet to playing in major markets, whether it's LA, whether it's New York, certainly, right? And then there's the cachet of the guys that you can go and play with. And that's always been the thing that I found interesting when we think about where the Nets are going to be from a cap space perspective. That's the thing that's always hard to kind of tell, like in this moment right now. Because if you fast forward to next year, let me throw out some cap figures for you. There's a ton of teams that are like minus 100 million on the books, depending because of all the things they have and the repeater tax. So like the NBA is fickle in that way that it's not this thing where just because the team doesn't have cap room, they can't get the star. No, there's always ways for teams to get stars. They can always find ways to manipulate it. The problem that you highlighted there again is that the Nets don't have the most attractive players. And I think the most critical part to it, 2 things. One, you mentioned Cam Thomas. Guaranteed that's someone that teams are going to ask for if you want to trade for a superstar caliber player because he's young and he's proven that he can be a scorer. And then 2, like, I know that the idea is you're going to trade for the star to bring them here. But who says that another team says you want the star will take Mikal Bridges? Because he's a very attractive player to have on your roster, and he's a great supporting piece on another team. Like, I always, just to reiterate the way you said it, because I think we've been in lockstep on this, it's always been hard for me to see the path to where the Brooklyn Nets add superstar talent, maintain all the good pieces they like that they have on the roster right now, get rid of all the bad stuff, and accomplish being a top 4 seed in the Eastern Conference. Like, I just don't, it doesn't compute to me. It always felt like this is wait until Ben Simmons is off the books and then go from there. The problem is it wasn't supposed to look this bad as you were getting to that place.
Yeah, and look, maybe we don't have the vision, right? Maybe we can't see it. Maybe this is why we're not NBA executives, right? Because we're not able to see the vision and all the moving parts. And I'm willing to be wrong about this. I hope I am, honestly. if I've ever wanted to be wrong about something, it's this. We want the Nets to be good. It's not that. It's like we, of course, like it'd be crazy to not want the Nets to be good. The whole point is to like have the Nets be good. It's just sometimes we look at this situation, talking about this team every single day, and we're like, it's very, very hard for me to see it when you factor in all this stuff, right? Take the whole look, this whole holistic look at like where the Nets are in terms of, okay, coach, question mark at best, right? Like we don't know. It's just that we just no idea. Okay, coach, roster. Well, that roster doesn't look very good because they lose every game by a lot. Right. So like that's okay. So that's a problem. Then you have, okay, well, maybe you have a lot of financial flexibility. Well, they don't have that either. Okay. Right. So they don't have financial because they have some of these contracts on the books. Oh, well, maybe they have their own picks. Well, nope, they don't have those. Right. So you can't, like, those are out to Houston. And so like you start to look at this, like when you start checking in the boxes, the things they don't have. Right. I just listed 4 things they don't have that are like pretty crucial for building a winning team. It's okay to not have one of them, and it's okay to not have 2 of them. If you don't have all 4 of them, it gets really hard, hard. And at some point, you don't even need to be like not creative. There just isn't a path. There is no path. Like it doesn't happen. And the problem with Marks, and my biggest concern with this, is that we've been mostly a proponent of Marks here. I think over the years, we've defended pretty much every one of his moves. I think, right? Like I think
we've at least been willing to understand where the vision was at the time of those decisions.
Yes,
right?
Yes. We'll never play revisionist history. I think we're very good about this. Like we do not go back and say, "Oh, well, we said." When we say it, I mean, it's on the record. You can look at it. Literally everything is recorded that we say. So like it's very easy to go. You don't have to get on the microfiche and go look at this. You just go listen, right? But like. We've been very good about this. Our concern about Marks in this specific timeline right now was that him being the shepherd of moving past his original mistakes felt like it might be the hardest thing to do.
Yep. And
to me, there's not evidence that he's able to do it right now. Like that's my biggest thing is that I think that there might be too much history with the other stuff that's happened here. And I just don't think he can see it. But again, please prove me wrong.
And that's why coming up here in a second, I'll explain why, following the firing of Jacque Vaughn and the current state of this roster, the Brooklyn Nets need to move on from Shawn Marks this offseason in order to successfully get this team back on track. Break down why in just 1 second.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Grammarly. Look, no matter what kind of work you're doing, actually, frankly, if you're not even doing work, communication is the key. You got emails, reports, presentations, honestly, text messages, all the stuff you just might be sending to the people in your life. This is where Grammarly can step in. It's going to be your AI writing partner to help you communicate more effectively and efficiently so you can make a bigger impact at work or just even in your real life. Look, I am considered to be a Grammarly power user. I've been a premium member for years now. It's saved me in so many situations when it comes to writing, when it comes to editing. Just makes it so easy. Points out all the mistakes you make, makes improvements on your communications, on articles you're writing, like I said, emails you're writing. I was looking at something for my wife for her business the other day. I said, why is Grammarly not on your computer here? We just cleaned up an email that she was sending to a really important client in about 2 seconds. And frankly, it was just because of the work that Grammarly did. You need Grammarly if you're communicating, if you're working, if you're doing any of this stuff. 96% of Grammarly users report that Grammarly helps them craft more impactful writing. You can save time with 1 click. You go from editing drafts in hours to just seconds. It's the gold standard of responsible AI. 14 years of experience, just about every IT certification under the sun. Make a bigger impact at work with Grammarly. Sign up and download for free at Grammarly.com/podcast. That's Grammarly.com, Grammarly.com/podcast. Easier said, done.
All right, so as we tie the bow on a difficult podcast conversation around one Shawn Marks and where his future stands, we remind you guys, you can head over to WeGotNets.com right now. Sign up for the free ebook, 5 net stories in 5 days. Opportunity to connect with us, ask us your questions, other stories that you want to hear about on WeGotNets.com. 100% free and 100% enjoyable. Check it out, WeGotNets.com free ebook. Now, here's why, as you said, and we did this with Jacque Vaughn too, because I think you and we've said this before. I am always of the mind of wanting the player, the coach, the GM. I want it to work out. I want it to be successful. Not from an individual level, because I think it's good when people are good at their jobs. And then from a Nets level, it's better for the podcast, better for the team if everyone's doing their jobs well. However, once you fired Jacques Vaughn, which is an acknowledgement that the extension was a mistake as well, as we know now. And now you're talking about going into an offseason where you're going to hire the next head coach, but you're also going to make big decisions about, are we spending draft assets to go get stars? Are we maybe considering trading Mikal Bridges or any of these players potentially? Are we re-signing Nick Claxton or not? And then waiting to get off of the Ben Simmons money down the road. If you're Joe Tsai and you're still in control of this team, if you fire Shawn Marks, from a PR perspective, we are resetting. When the new GM walks in the door, he sets the table of the vision. Hey, we got bad money on the books, contracts that I don't like. I'm going to sort all this out, but it's going to take me this upcoming year and into the next off season because this wasn't any of my doing. I need to recalibrate. To keep Shawn Marks is to do what we're doing right now. Constantly be looking at every step along the way and trying to follow this breadcrumb trail and see why it's going to work out or how it's going to be successful. If you want to reset the narrative around the organization, Shawn Marks now does become the poster child because everybody else that was here before him, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, James Harden, Jacques Vaughn, Steve Nash, they're all gone. It's just now Shawn Marks that represents this.
Yeah, and I wonder too, as I think you put it really good at the beginning of this, where you were saying that like he overplayed or misunderstood the talent on the roster, right? Where they seem to have really misunderstood sort of like what they have. And I actually wonder, I feel after you said that, I was like, oh, I think that ends up being the maybe the death knell, right? Is that like that misunderstanding? Because there's a chance, it might not happen, but there is a chance that this looks so bad over these last that you actually can't tell yourself another story, right? We've been in the situation with the Nets where you can kind of tell yourself different stories about different stuff, right? Sometimes those are correct stories and sometimes they're not. But there's a chance that this looks so bad where it's like, well, one player can't fix this or two players can. And if that's, right? Because if they continue to be the worst net rating team in the league, which again, they are right now since the All-Star break, small sample, right? But 2 of those games are against Boston. Like there's some rough, some tough teams in here in Minnesota. So it's like it's not been a cakewalk, but still the worst, right? No matter what. And you start to run out of stories to tell. And I do wonder that if he misunderstood sort of like what a coaching change would do or what the actual talent they had on the roster or lack thereof, and it looks so bad, I don't know how with a straight face you can say, hey, we're a move away. How could you say that? Like it'd be literally impossible. We're 1 move away. We're 2 moves away. And then we're going to beware. The 8th seed, like right now they're the 10th seed. They're never making the play-in, right? And so, I mean, maybe the trade's hurt, so maybe they'll be able to catch Atlanta.
Next 2 games are against Atlanta. Like there you go. You know, like they'll.
By the way, even if they won the next 2 games, they'd still be 2 games out of the play-in.
Yeah. So
it's like they're not. It's not like these 2 games would even get them there. They'd still have a uphill climb against Atlanta. So, by the way, Atlanta just killed the Jazz without Trey. Yeah. So I just
right, but by the way, because having a guy like DeJounte Murray, it's like, oh well, we've seen they maybe play better without each other. So even losing Trey, you still get this thing that elevates. The Nets don't have that either, right? Take somebody off the court,
Jalen Johnson. They have guys, right? They have Bogdan Bogdanovic, right? Like, and so I actually do wonder if this is going to be it because you'll run out of chances. You'll run out of chances to tell any compelling story. And I think that this could be, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the final run.
And the big part of it for me is, again, go back to last trade deadline. Could have let Dorian Finney-Smith go through. Could have let Mikal at that time. You know, a lot of these players. Okay, you stayed with them. That's the biggest part here too. Shawn Marks has a sense of obligation to continue to have specifically Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson to that extent because he gave him the contract too. He has a self-obligation to make that be a part of the success story. So there's just a world where it's that much harder for him to let go of it, whether it was Houston at this deadline, whether it's the offseason, whether it's next deadline. A new GM they would come in with that sense of, hey, listen, they're all great players, whatever it is. I got to make decisions for this organization going forward. You detach yourself. That's the way it works. Once you remove yourself from being the person that made the prior decisions, I no longer have the obligation and I don't have any guilt or responsibility for cutting ties, taking pennies on the dollar for certain players. Doesn't matter. I'm here to reset and build my own version of this team. Shawn Marks is constantly reconstructing his own versions of this franchise.
Again, I'm being dead serious about this. I'd love to be wrong about this.
Of course.
I want the Nets to be good. We want the Nets to be good. There's been plenty of things that we've been wrong about. I can name them, like probably defended Jacques Vaughn a little too long. Was definitely wrong about Cam Thomas. I know I was, for sure, 100%. I was wrong about him. Guess who was like so glad when Cam Thomas was scoring a lot and good? Me, of course. Happy to be wrong about these things, right? Like, it's just no one will never die with a take, right? It's like life's too short to just not change your priors around like how you feel about things. Where I am, I don't say this with happiness, but one stand that we took going into this trade deadline was it's reset time. It's reset time. We said it before the trade deadline leading into it. We had multiple podcasts. It's on the record. We're like, it is reset time. You don't want to be a day late with this. You want to be a day early. Like, you have to be a day early with this stuff. Already, the Nets look many days late. Already, they look late. So many days in 2 weeks, right? Yeah. They look so many days late. And once it gets late, it gets so hard to recoup value. We see it over and over and over again in the NBA. It's the biggest mistake you make. If you wait too long, you'll pay for it in years.
Yep.
And that to me is what the biggest mistake the Nets made. And it seems so crystal clear to us. Maybe the deals weren't there. Maybe it was one pick back. I don't know. Right. Like there's conflicting reporting here, but it was one pick back in Jalen Johnson. I don't know, whatever. Or Jalen. But I just think that since that time, there's been nothing but that line has been proven nothing but correct, and unfortunate because we might be headed toward a real dark winter here with the Nets.
Yeah, no, 100%. And then, as we say, like to be wrong, doesn't feel like we're going to be wrong, and that's unfortunate for this team and unfortunate for the path that they have going forward, which obviously we'll continue to be a part of over the last 26 games of the season. And who knows, maybe they come out here and they show something, but that's the other problem with firing Jacques Vaughn and putting Kevin Ollie as interim head coach. Where is the vision to improve the play on the court for this team? It doesn't feel like you have that voice necessarily right now.
I'll tell you right now, sorry to interrupt, and I know I've gone like really long on this podcast, but
you missed an episode.
I do. What will have? They are going to win more games. Like, the schedule does get easier, right? Like they're not just going to go 0-20 here. Like, that's for sure. But I just want to have this other stuff on the record because I do believe that, like, this is at this point, it's like such a critical time. It's more than just, oh, can they make the play in? Like, this last games mean so much more than like whatever you can see. And if it's like even below 500 or something like that, I think that like you're looking at a really bad outcome.
Yeah, and I will, as you say, on the record, as I said, I thought the team could win 17 games over that, go 17-14 in the back end of this after Jacques Vaughn, all that stuff. And under 500 will not be good enough, right? There needs to be a version of this, not about making the plan or not anymore, but there needs to be a version of this to see any level of future success around what their core is. And it just doesn't seem particularly optimistic at the moment.
All right, we're going to get out of here. We'll hang out in a little bit on YouTube. Still got a bunch of people here on YouTube. Much appreciated. Everyone's sticking around for this hour as we rolled through multiple episodes, and really, really cool stuff in terms of just everyone showing up, not in terms of the product on the court, obviously, but if you want to grab something,
the product on the
good
podcast,
product,
right? I mean, this product.
Go to WeGotNets.com. Grab that free ebook. You will definitely enjoy it because basically everyone that we heard from has really raved about it. So we really appreciate that. Go to WeGotNets.com.
I ate a cheesecake. I took a nap. What more can one man do? Why, that is Jay Sherman, the critic.
One of the all-time great poets. We're back again tomorrow in a moment on YouTube talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball. Cheesecake and a nap. Basketball. Yeah. All right, guys. As Doug said, man, thank you. Because as we come on to do these post episodes, sometimes we also have other thoughts about discussions we want to have, and then we run basically double episodes. So everyone sat here really patiently at Locked On Nets. If you have a comment or a question that you want to throw up there, we'll roll through a few. Not going to stick around a long time because we're getting into it's only 11:15, but it feels later to me because this season has been so grinding. I saw this one here that I thought was interesting, Doug. If we keep losing, why would Claxton re-sign with us if another team comes even close to a decent offer?
Great question.
Honestly,
I never thought about it that way. Yeah.
I was like, you know what? Like, we're talking about Mikal Bridges. Do stars want to come here or not? It's like, what does Nick Claxton want to stick around?
That's great. For? That's the other thing too. It's like, that's a great way to put it because we never think about it that way. It's like, hey, maybe I don't want to date you. Like, you ever think about that?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Did you ever think about that? It's like, like maybe I don't want to be here. Right. Cause like now I do think the market for him is going to be pretty, I don't think it's going to be super robust, and it's not his fault. I just think that teams tend to not really want to overpay centers, right? Especially unless they're going to be like for sure starters, and really, really impactful. And I struggle to see the team that's going to be love to grab his particular style of play. So I do wonder if the Nets will end up being the highest bidder here. But yeah, this is a great way to put it. I think this is the way to think about all these guys, honestly. Stars, other guys, right? Like, I don't know, what's the pull to do what? Get dumpstered not every night? Like I don't know.
100%. So I saw this when we were doing the recording, and I was like, yeah, this blind assumption about, we'll just keep Claxton and find value for him later. Maybe not so much. Who is worse, Billy King or Shawn Marks? Well, here's the best part about
it. Marks is better than Billy King. Come on.
I do. Yes, I do believe that. I don't think that Shawn Marks could actually ever. It's hard to get to the point of being worse than Billy King. I'll put it that way, because even though you could say, well, Shawn Marks failed in getting superstars, that era didn't work. But on paper, he was getting some of the best players in the league to come to play in Brooklyn.
No brainers.
Was getting past their prime, aged players that the second that they made those trades, everyone was like, what is Billy King doing right now? So it's apples and oranges.
We're being serious. We've defended Marks. I think Marks has been a very good GM for a long time. It's not that. I just think right now we're getting close to like letting go of the rope time. And I think that by some of these moves, he's been a day late on a few of these things, and it just is so hard to see it now. And like that's what it is. And I get worried that there's like that he's not applying like a sunk cost fallacy, or he is applying a sunk. Well, which one is that? Well, there's a sunk cost fallacy applied to this, where it's like he's not recognizing that. Hey, well, to some degree he is, because like they didn't want to go and
damage by holding on to this, right?
Right, exactly. Like, cause like, like to some degree, he's like, well, they have the team in the lottery right now and they're not going to get their pick, but it's not, I don't feel like there's a hardcore analysis of the situation that feels commiserate with what we're seeing. And that's where I get a little worried that we're getting into good money after bad territory, which would make sense. It's like human nature. It's really hard to do this stuff and have a steady hand. But when you're the one that did it, you'll make bad decisions to dig yourself out of the hole. Right. And I think that I think that's what we're witnessing here.
This one real quick from J Law Jr. A lot of Nets would have given up Bridges and Johnson for the picks. If Cy turned down the Houston offer, he should be forced to sell the team. Now, again, that's not. Yeah. First, I'll tell you what billionaires don't do. Listen to what anybody else wants them to do. It's kind of the beautiful thing about having a ton of money.
You don't think Josiah's a listener? You don't think he likes and subscribes wherever
he tunes in.
Wherever he listens to the podcast, wherever he listens. You think he grabbed the ebook? Actually, I'm gonna look at the emails here real quick to see if he grabbed the ebook. Yeah, he might have.
See if he was one of the signups there. I'm gonna actually, you know what? Stay tuned for the next episode, because I have an interesting new intro that you're really gonna enjoy.
You think Cy lacks? You think that could be it? At
JoeLaxVision@gmail.com? Was that? No, that can't be right.
I mean, it could be it. I don't know.
The other thing is, as an owner, like you put the GM, like, you hired Shawn Marks to be the guy that makes these decisions, and then you fire the guy that makes the decision if you think you're doing poorly. You don't take on you're not, at least a good owner does not interject himself and say, well, here's what I think we should be doing. You're a guy that's making money off an investment. You're not supposed to be a basketball mind per se. Last one I have here, and then we can probably shut it down, as we all see when Doug gets sleepy and gives a yawn, it's time to wrap things up.
I checked a couple more. I gave a little yawn. I gave a little yawn in here, but it's okay. I'm good to go. I feel
on paper, Locked On Nets from Mira Slayer. I always want to say Mr. when I see you. You have been here before. I feel like we're supposed to be a good defensive team. Are we ever going to get there? Perhaps we need to bring a defensive-minded coach. Yeah, I mean, again, this goes to like individual talent versus collective value. None of these guys defensively, especially I'll say from this, like Nicholas Claxton, great around the basket, great shot blocker, right? Versatile defender. But they don't have, like, Mikal Bridges, he still gets referenced this way on broadcast, one of the best defenders in the game.
He doesn't even guard the other player's best players. Spencer Dinwiddie guarded the other team's best players.
So there's a world where you were trying to, save him from some of those hardest matchups. Again, defense is the hardest thing to watch and examine in real time. But I don't that thing that has been attached to him and was attached to Cam Johnson. It is not talked about with Cam Johnson anymore. I'm surprised that it's still talked about with Mikal Bridges because I don't see it on a game in, game out basis when basically all you're looking for is on a handful of key possessions, you go, wow, Mikal Bridges really locked his man up. I have not said that maybe ever since Mikal Bridges has been in Brooklyn Nets. So
no.
That's why
he's not like that. He's not like some elite defender or anything. Like he's probably a good system. He's a good system defender, but if you're like in an all switching scheme, but we haven't seen like, Kawhi like defense. I don't think anyone was comparing him to that, but like, there's not like the defense never jumps off. It never jumps off the page at you at all, right? Ever. I mean, it's not. If you weren't told that he's a good defender, I'm not sure we would have come to that analysis individually, right?
For sure. Sorry, we're gonna pivot here a little bit. Adam and Doug, you guys hyped the Rockets offer. They don't own that many of our picks.
Well, they own this year's. They own the swap for next year, which has been again like so. The reason the swap's important now is because like Brooklyn almost for sure projects to be worse, right? So it's like so they own that swap, and well, I guess we're already one in the books because they swapped last year, and then they own one more after that. So it's 3. I mean, it's 3 more picks, right?
Yeah,
am I right about that?
And they have the second round pick as well next year, just in case you want that in there. The 2025.
Well, here, remember here too. It's like so. Yes, they do own enough.
They also, by the way, hold on, real quick. No protections 2026 via Brooklyn, and also 2027 swap rights first round pick for the Nets as well. So that's 2027, right. 2026, 2025, and the upcoming 2024 plus the second round pick. So they have 4. Effectively the rights to 4 first round picks for the Brooklyn Nets. They have a ton of our picks. They have all of them.
I just don't understand that. I don't understand the comment.
Sorry, Al, you're a frequent flyer. I'm not trying to jump on you there, but 100% they have all of the picks, and that's why you want to make that trade if in fact they were
picks or swaps. And for the Nets situation, that's material here because the Nets project to be worse, right? And so that's where you really run into the problem. Go throw a couple here. Yeah, we know. We're the best. Yeah. Help us deal with the garbage. Hey, buddy, look, we're coming here every single night. We'll laugh through the pain, man. That's what Adam and I do. Adam and I were dying laughing before the podcast started because we make each other laugh. We'll make each other laugh on the way out too, and hopefully make you guys laugh too as we work through this stuff.
I do think some levity will be required on the podcast over the back end of this season. We may need to bring some of the levity fully into the episodes as well because it's going to get them here.
Well, some's going to get the censor, it's going to get the content warning on it. So I don't want to be, I can't go totally everything that goes off the podcast.
We'll clean on some of the bits here.
Did I work in California?
I saw that one. Yeah.
No.
You work in California, buddy?
But I'd be curious why you want to know that. We show up more than Ben does. Somewhat true. Hey, look, we held out hope he was going to be okay. I actually was shocked he played yesterday. That was actually, I thought, a good sign. I was never in a million years after he was getting like knee imaging done did I think he was going to play the next day. So, hey, that's a W. It's a little W in the book, right? To be able to play after getting a little bit hurt.
By the way, but yes, no, just by the way, because Crazy Cage, if you're in here underneath a different name that you're not over on Twitter, then this is actually just another pat on our back. He had said, as this one was winding down tonight, just waiting for the post-game podcast with Locked On Nets and Adam Arbrecht and Doug Norrie. It's honestly the only constant positive this team has. Now, here's the key part: cherish them. Cherish. Right. I have not been told to be cherished by my loved ones or by even some of the most dedicated friends in my life. But at least I have that from the Nets community. Appreciate you.
I don't want to call us heroes, but I'll just say we're heroes.
Yeah.
So that's it. Yeah. I don't have to. Can they waive Simmons to get off the contract if someone picks him up? I would like to think about how much I'd be willing to bet that this wouldn't happen. And I think I would put it at if it was even odds, I would like that they waive him and that's another team picks up the contract. I would bet $50,000 right now.
Right.
And I would need to get approval. I would need to get family approval on a higher number. and I'd be willing to go more. And I would also just see how many people wanted to pile in on the bet with me if I was able to get money coming in the other side. There's no chance. There's no chance they can't get off this contract. This contract's stuck. I maybe trade deadline next year if he plays a bunch, and like I don't even know. It's just the contract's so bad. He's unplayable. Like you'd have to attach so much stuff to him to be able to get it. So no.
Short
Sorry.
answer. No. It's a bummer, man. That one, just in the old Shawn Marks category, again, it was like for the money that worked. But I remember back at the time of that where it was like, you took back Seth Curry and, all these players didn't really matter. And you took back Ben Simmons for the money. I do wonder, I wish to be a fly on the wall in some of those negotiations where it's like, well, if you don't take Ben Simmons and Curry, then no deal. And we'll just hold on to James Harden. If Shawn Marks like, well, I guess if that's all that I can do, I'll take them, and not push for the other young players in the organization that offer some value. Like those are some of the fringe details that I'm always curious.
I think Maury's got a pretty steady hand with that. I think like maybe another GM, they could have gone that way, but yeah, real quick. I want to answer this really fast. We answered this. If you're just tuning in here, we answered this earlier in this episode. I think that the same offer will not be there. We said this. I think it would still be a good idea to do this, but I actually think that the offer won't be as good. I think these picks and stuff are going in the wrong direction. So
I think at a minimum they'll say, well, we'll keep the lottery pick this year, like most likely a lottery pick, right? So that's off the table. And then we'll go from there, right?
Maybe not. I mean, maybe Bridges. I mean, Bridges is good, right? Like, and the contract is great. Like, I don't want to like just totally bag on Simmons. Bridges. Bridges still has a ton of value, right?
No,
he's
miscast.
He's miscast right now for sure. Like he's miscast on this team, but if you had him with Şengün and Van Vliet and Amin Thompson and guys like this and like Cam Whitmore, and he was the third option again. Yeah, he's a great contract for sure. He has tons of value still. He's not. I don't think he's devalued himself a ton here, but it is getting shaky, I think.
No, and it's less about Mikal Bridges, just to your point. It's more about where the team is and where those picks are going. All those picks keep looking more and more attractive, so it means that Houston's going to keep pushing back on it, right? And then at that point, what I would wonder is if they were negotiating on that point, if it would be, well, we want the quote weak, give us the weak lottery pick now in the first round, and we can try to turn that into something and then devalue a later pick, right? Like the Nets in theory would think that the further they get away from 2023, 2024 season, the better they get and the weaker that their picks are going to become in theory. So that would be an interesting thing to see play out this summer. I also think it'll be fascinating. Remember, the Memphis Grizzlies were the team that wanted to offer a bunch of picks last year at the deadline for Mikal Bridges. It won't be their own picks, but other teams will offer picks. And I know we've always said the Houston one, the self-control is the most important thing, but I would be interested, like what are the relative packages? Control of 2 of your own future round first picks or 4 first round picks from another team? There's going to be some equation there for Shawn Marks or whatever GM to do.
Yeah. All right. We're going to get out of here. Much appreciated. Everyone that's stuck around. Really, really good stuff. It's always hard to jump in here. Well, it's not hard, but it's always, I know it can be tough for fans after watching these games and, you're feeling good about the Grizzlies win. And then all of a sudden this is what happens. And you're like, oh my gosh, what's happening? How many more games? Look, we're going to be here coming at you every single day doing the podcast, win or lose, no problem. So you always have someone to, be able to talk to a little bit about it. No worries there. Much appreciate everyone here that jumped into YouTube.
100%. Listen, guys, just bear with me for a second. I know that Doug doesn't care about this. We can just wrap this thing up, but I already gave 2 quotes from the critic. I just want to round it out with one more if I can.
Yeah, get one more.
Yeah, here we go. just to make sure we're really putting a nail in the proverbial coffin. Thank you for the pizza, Mr. Sherman, from the critic.
There you go. One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again after the Atlanta game, talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball. Yeah.